So every lesson will be recorded, and I'll upload it on the website, on the platform every week. So I uploaded it within 2 days. However, due to load shedding, takes a bit of time because I basically run this overnight. So the recording process is quick. The putting the file together is very quick. But when I need to transfer it from the platform I'm using to YouTube, it takes overnight. So basically, I go sleep, and the next morning I wake up, it's done. But if I just wait for it, I'll sit here for 4 to 6 hours and wait for it. So I run it overnight. Unfortunately, where I'm staying, I have load shedding sometimes during the night. So when I wake up, and then I have to restart the whole process. So without load shedding, within 2 days will be uploaded onto the platform. So Monday to Wednesday, I have the CTA class. Their stuff have been uploaded. And then Thursday and Friday, it is third years, Mac 3702, Mac 3701. So what is the structure of the course? Or what's the structure of the lesson? The structure of the lesson is simply as follows. We run a Zoom class every week for 90 minutes. Sometimes it will go for 120, but it won't exceed 2 hours. So the idea is to have it for 90 minutes. The first 30 minutes, we do a recap on the week's content. And then the last 60 minutes, we do a question. This week will be slightly different. This week, we won't do a question, and I'll explain why. So this week will do a high-level overview on Mac 3702. The reason why we won't cover a question this week is strategy and risk management. Strategy and risk management is part of your syllabus, but there's hardly ever a question that gets asked. So as we work through question papers that do have a question, it will be maximum 4 marks or 5 marks because of the percentage of the syllabus that strategy and risk management make up. However, you do want to be able to cover it because it could be easy, some easy marks. Okay, so we won't be covering. So this session will be a bit shorter, but we will be covering a overview on the Mac 3702 syllabus as well as an overview on strategy and risk management. I had a detailed lesson on this with the CTA students. I won't go as in detail with you guys because from a third year point of view, you don't need to know all of those kind of technical, all of those details. But we'll still give you a nice overview, and we will also try to explain to you and make it real to you how it actually gets used in the real world. I'll spend about 2 minutes to show you the different approaches. For example, the traditional approach as to how we formulate a strategy. When I say traditional, based on a textbook basis and what is required from us from an academic point of view, then I'll show you how Jeff Bezos look at a strategy, which is kind of the opposite to what the traditional approach is. And then you can go think for yourself which one is more appropriate. You may have a combination of the two and so forth. So let's get into today's lesson. You're doing Mac 3702, which is financial management. It is safe to assume, because you're all in third year, it is safe to assume that you have covered accounting somehow or another, and you should know the accounting equation, which says assets equals equity plus liabilities. Now, if we link that to Mac 3702 or to financial management, what you should know from a financial management point of view, assets represents the investments that a company make. And then on the other side of the equation, equity and liabilities represents the sources of finance that the company obtains in order to fund to fund your assets, to fund your investments. Now, when it comes to investments, the typical topic that we will use to analyze and to evaluate an investment is capital budgeting. Okay, because capital budgeting is all about long-term decisions relating to long-term investments. On the other side of the equation, we have equity plus liabilities, the sources of finance. Over here, there's basically three topics that is big in financial management that relates to equity and liabilities. Number one, it is your capital structure. Your capital structure relates to how much funding is financed through equity and how much funding is financed through liabilities. The second topic is your cost of capital. Based on your capital structure, what would your cost of capital result in? Okay, so remember, depending on how much debt and how much equity you have, that will impact the cost of equity and it will impact the cost of debt. The third topic that is linked to both of those is sources of finance. Sources of finance is equity and liabilities. However, we go a little bit more detail. What type of equity and then what type of debt? With equity, there are certain advantages and certain disadvantages. With debt, there are certain advantages, certain disadvantages. So that is how all of that fits in together. So just in that short summary, we said there's capital budgeting we mentioned, very big topic from a financial management point of view. There's capital structure, sources of finance, and cost of capital. Cost of capital is WACC. WACC is a big topic within financial management. Source of finance and capital structure links with weighted average cost of capital. Why are those two topics so big within financial management? As a finance manager, it's all linked to the responsibility of a finance manager. The responsibility of a finance manager is a lot. Okay. So for example, if you must be a finance manager one day, if you have to be a finance manager one day, you will realize that your responsibility is to deal with auditors. Your responsibility is to grow the company. Your responsibility is to manage day-to-day operations, all of those type of stuff. So from a financial management perspective, where does capital budgeting and WACC come in? What's important to understand is that every single company wants to every single company wants to grow sustainably. So every single company wants to grow sustainably into the long term. So in order to grow sustainably long term, you need to continuously make investments of a long term nature. And hence, you will have to continuously assess whether a particular investment is viable or not. Just think about it. Think about Eskom. Like one of the reasons, I mean, there's many reasons, but one of the reasons is why do we have this problem with electricity? Because they never made those long-term investment decisions to ensure that after 20 years, a plant is no longer viable. Will need a new one. And also, we have to continuously maintain your current plant because those long-term investment decisions were not made appropriately. We're sitting with this problem. Now, that will happen. The same thing will happen to a company that do not continuously make long-term investment decisions. That's one reason. For WACC, why it's also so important from a WACC perspective, in order to make long-term investments, it's a huge cost. So you need lots of finance. And hence, you will have continuously assess which form of finance is the best and which form of finance is the cheapest. And that is why those two topics from a financial management point of view is so big, because it's something that you will work with on a daily basis. All you have to do yourself a favor. Take 5 minutes and read let's say the CFO's report from Cecil. They just talk about investment and finance, or Google the Cecil CFO, what they do on a daily basis. It's all about managing investments, all about managing finance, making sure that the capital structure is appropriate, that they're obtaining the best finance, and all of those type of things. So it happens in the real world. So those are the two big topics initially. capital budgeting, source of finance. Now, where does strategy risk management fit in? Strategy and risk management is basically the basis of a business, if I can put it that way. A company has a purpose. They start their business, they have, or the founder starts a business and hopefully has a why, has a purpose, have a mission. As a result, they will have some core values. As a result, they will have some vision in mind, meaning what do they see, what do they wish the world would be, or how do they see the world in 10, 20, 30 years' time? So that's their vision. So they would make investment decisions that is linked to their mission, linked to their core values, and linked to their what did I say? Mission, core values, and vision. So they would make those, and their strategy, how they go about doing it, would all be linked to their mission, vision, and core values. So that is where strategy, risk management, and governance fit into the whole picture. Everything that they are doing should be linked to the long-term vision. For example, let's take Jeff Bezos, for example. We all know Amazon. When Jeff Bezos started his business, whenever, 1994. So when Jeff Bezos started his business in 1994, he started with books, right? And when you asked him what he was, he said he sell books online. However, when he wrote his business plan, whatever he wrote, he told himself he's not starting a book business, he's starting an internet business. So he knew from the beginning he's starting an internet business. But he's ultimately starting, he's building an internet business. But what did he start off with? He started off with books, and as he went, he expanded to series and movies, and then expanded and expanded until he got what he wanted. His internet business. So from the beginning, he was on a mission to provide customers with stuff that they really need, according to him. And his mission was, and his vision was to build a internet business. How he went about it, his strategy was, he started off with books. Once books took its place, he then found out from customers what do they want next, and it was CDs and DVDs and movies, and then he went to that, and that's how he slowly built till he has this huge company that basically sells everything. So that is how basically you start off your business. That's how we link strategy, risk management, and to capital investments. So you make the investments that meets your strategy. Same with WAC. Now let's go further. There's some more big topics. The other two big topics within financial management is as follows: is financial analysis and is mergers and acquisitions. Okay. Now, financial analysis is just basically where you analyze your business and to assess whether the trend is a good trend going forward, or there's any problems. Okay. What you should know from a financial analysis point of view, that it is not a top, although they test it separately, in the real world, you use it only as a means to make decisions. Okay, so you're not going to do it separately. You actually just use it to analyze your business and to help you make decisions. It is not something that will decide on a particular action. It just helps you in your decision-making process. But from a financial management point of view, from an academic point of view, from a MAC 3702 point of view, financial analysis is very, very big. It counts for quite a bit of marks. The next topic is the next big topic. So there's four big topics within financial management. It is capital budgeting, it is cost of capital, it is financial analysis, and the fourth big topic is mergers and acquisitions. In the last few years, not every year, but almost every year for the last few years from 2016. So this course started in 2014. MAC 3702 started in 2014, And actually, I think from 2015 or from 2016, one of the two, almost every single year from that date, mergers and acquisitions came up. Now, merger and acquisitions is a big topic because it happens quite often, quite regularly. So remember, a company can expand in two ways. They can either expand organically or they can expand through a merger and acquisition. Expanding organically, we will apply capital budgeting. So when a company expands organically, we apply capital budgeting. What does organic mean? Expanding organically means ShopRite opening up more ShopRite stores. Okay. Another example would be Coca-Cola creating a new another cool drink brand or another cool drink product or another cool drink flavor. Okay, so that is expanding organically with whatever you have. You're just building something else from within inside. You're either opening up more stores, or you are expanding geographically, or you are creating new products and so forth. So you are expanding from within. That's organic. The other one is merger and acquisition, and that is you will buy another business or you will merge with another business. I'm pretty sure many of you would know Yuppie Chef, however you pronounce it. I think it's like I think it is they sell cups and glasses and stuff like that. Um, so what happened this week? That Mr. Price bought Yappy Chef over. So from a Mr. Price point of view, that is an expansion through a merger and acquisition. Mr. Price bought Yappy Chef for 460 million rand this week. I mean, not this week, but the deal went through this week. Obviously, the payments is going to happen at some point in time. So that is a merger and acquisition. So when would you do a merger and acquisition? When would you do an organic expansion? That is for the board to decide. That's for the company to decide. But just something interesting. Warren Buffett, one of the world's most famous and well-known investors, he always tells you one of his advices are as follows: that you must be skeptical. You must actually be worried and run away from a company that is continuously growing through a merger and acquisition. Because generally, these dodgy things happening. Or when you say we're not continuously aggressively meaning just buying every single business they can. And basically, um, one of the most recent real world examples to prove that rule true was Steinhoff. Steinhoff bought every single year for don't know how many years they bought different businesses, and all what was happening is dodgy businesses happening. So why is it so difficult? Because if you are buying for an investor to analyze a company, they will look at trends and past results and so forth. But if you are buying new businesses all the time, um, to compare last year with this year is going to be very difficult. So he says, always be skeptical. He's not doesn't mean you must stay away completely. Just be skeptical. But when does merger and acquisitions actually make sense? So, for example, if you read Life Healthcare financial statements, one of their strategies is to grow and to expand through acquisitions. Why does it make sense for them? They are a healthcare company. What you should know: for a healthcare company, you need to apply with rules and regulations of the country. So, for example, for a hospital expands in basically in one of two ways. Organically, they'll expand organically in one of two ways. They'll either create a new service. So, for example, they don't offer gynecology, whatever you call that, and then they will open up a gynecology, whatever you say, or whatever the term is, a gynecologist type of service, or a cardiovascular service, or whatever they call it, right? So the type of offerings, that is how they expand. The second way they expand, which is the most common way, is to increase the number of beds each hospital have. Now, in both cases, whether you expand by opening up a new division of heart, um, gynecology, whatever it is, radiology, and all of those type of stuff. Every time you open up a new thing of that nature, you first need to you seek government approval. Same with beds. A hospital can't just put new beds or extra beds. They need to have approval to say that you can now add one more bed. So there's lots of red tape. So to start a hospital and so forth. So if a company like Life Healthcare, they expand to India. Instead of starting a new hospital from scratch, they will have to go through that entire process, which can be years, because dealing with government is a problem unless you pay them off. But even in that case, it takes years. So the easier way, or a way to speed up that process, is to buy a company that already have all the licenses. So that is a one way of doing it. So it's those type of reasoning that would make sense to expand through acquisition. Or you want another example is AB InBev, one of the world's largest beer manufacturers. A few years back, they acquired SAB Miller. Why did they acquire SAB Miller? Why did they not just start up their own one here? SAB Miller is well established over here. So to just, instead of coming into South Africa and starting their own thing, it's going to take some time. And they're going to have to fight off SAB Miller. And what is a common thing in the beer industry is that locals prefer the local beer. So for AB InBev to come and still try to learn how to make a local beer is quite, it's going to be a lengthy process. So all they do is buy over AB InBev that have the market share in South Africa and that have already the beers and the tastes and all of those stuff that the local market wants, and that's how they expand. And another reason was the markets or the geographical areas that AB InBev wanted to enter. SAB Miller was already there and well established. So just buying on SAB Miller means they have access to all of those. So those made sense as opposed to starting all from scratch. But like I said, like taking a caution to Warren Buffett, what he has to say that when a company aggressively acquires just many, many companies, you might just be worried because they try, in many cases, they are being dodgy. So that is merger and acquisitions, when to expand through a merger and acquisition, when to expand organically. Then we have some other smaller topics. Other smaller topics would be, which can be quite a bit of marks, like 10 to 15 marks. It would be working capital. It would be dividends. Okay, so those two, working capital and dividends, can account for about, and in fact, source of finance, although I mentioned it above, source of finance, working capital, and the other one, dividends, they can account between 10 to 20 marks each, depending on how they feel. Now, let's understand working capital. Working capital includes your short-term investments. It includes your operating investments. So without working capital, a company will not be able to operate. Let's think about this. For ShopRite, for Pick n Pay, for Truworths, Woolworths, all of them, for them to operate, they need groceries, they need clothing, whatever they are selling. Though that is all the groceries and clothing, that's inventory to those companies. Inventory is an operating asset and forms part of working capital. Without inventory, Truworths, Woolworths, and so forth won't be able to make sales. So that's an important, so working capital inventory is an important investment for those companies. Similarly, for Woolworths, Truworths, for Sheeny, for example, for Sheeny and Truworths, I think close to 100%, somewhere between 90 and 95%, I think, of their sales are through credit. So most of their sales come through people buying on the Foschini card, the Truworths card. So trade receivables, debtors, is an important balance it's an important investment for Foschini, Woolworths, and Truworths. Without that store card, they would lose quite a bit of their sales. So hence, for them to operate sustainably, working capital is an important number, an important balance for them to monitor. So that is why in some questions you will have that question because it is an important number for some companies or for many companies. Um, and then with working capital comes creditors. So they need to manage the creditors as well because remember, the whole purpose of inventory. So if we use Truworths, for example, I don't know the exact numbers, but let's make up numbers. Truworths, they will acquire the inventory, which is their clothing. Let's say the clothing, which is the inventory, is sit in the store for 30 days. After 30 days, clothing gets sold. But once it gets sold, it will most likely not be sold for cash. It gets sold via the credit, the store card. So now we have an asset that was inventory is now converted into a different asset, debtors. And let's just make up a number. We know there's like 6 months, 12 months, but let's say it will now take 1 month before the someone pays. So they had inventory for 30 days. Then after 2 months, then inventory gets sold. But when it gets sold, it goes to debtors. So and let's say they pay after 2 months. So that debtor balance is sitting there for 2 months, which is 60 days. That means 30 plus 60 is 90 days. For 90 days, they're not getting in money for that one transaction. So they need a mechanism in place. They need financing in place for that 90 days so that they can operate. Why? They need to operate by paying their staff. They need to operate by paying the rent. They need to operate by paying the lights, the water, insurance, and all of those type of stuff. They need money to operate. So how are they going to fund this money? There's different ways. They can fund through cash, what they have in their bank. In many cases, companies are not going to take all the cash in the bank to fund operations. They generally limit how much cash they will use for operations. So they will say, of the total cash balance, only 5% can be used for operations. Thereafter, they must find other sources of finance. So how do they find finance? Either through an overdraft or they have short-term financing from the bank. But before they touch that, they deal with their creditors. The creditors will, when they buy the clothing, they don't need to pay the creditors immediately. The creditors say only pay me after 30 days. So they buy inventory. The inventory stays in the store for 30 days. The inventory gets sold and then transfers to debtors. But at that 30 days, only then they need to pay the creditors. So that means the creditors fund the first 30 days of the 90 days. And that means Truworths will need to find other sources of finance, either their own cash or overdraft or other loan financing for the other 60 days. So that's an important principle. In many, if you don't, for many companies, if they don't manage the working capital cycle carefully, they will become illiquid and become insolvent, and they'll have to shut down their business. And it's a very serious number for Woolworths, Truworths, and so forth. In fact, they have like specialized people, or they have specific people just monitoring working capital. Let's look at Pick n Pay. For Pick n Pay, there was well, I looked at this long, like years ago. I never looked at any time recently. But basically, Pick n Pay doesn't have, you don't buy on credit, you have to pay cash. But what they do is um, money comes into the bank. I mean, they buy inventory. Let's say they buy Coke from Coca-Cola, comes in. After 30 days, after 30 days, inventory got sold. So comes in at the end of the month, the Coke goes out. But when the Coke goes out, someone paid cash. They actually received the cash. The interesting part, though, was that they only paid the creditors after 60 days. So they could buy inventory twice and make sales twice and only then pay the creditors. There's a very different model. So you must look when you analyze a company. And this comes in working capital, and also when you analyze coming from a financial statements analysis point of view, that's how you will have a look at it. But that's just to explain the importance of working capital. The next one was source of finance. We had discussed it above. And then the third one is dividends. Dividends is hardly ever tested, but you do want to score the marks when it is tested. Dividends is a big topic in CTA. It's not 10 marks. It's big topic in CTA. From a MAC 3702 point of view, it's not as big, but what you just kind of need to be aware of is the different ways they can the different policies for dividends, because the dividend policy is indirectly, when I say indirectly, it's not really testing dividends, but they kind of need you to know how to calculate dividends when you're dealing with the weighted average cost of capital. But from a specific dividend topic, you might just know that there's two approaches, but we will cover that when we get to dividends. So those are the topics on a high level. Weighted average cost of capital, capital budgeting, what did I say? Mergers and acquisitions, financial analysis, the four big topics. Then you have source of finance, working capital, and dividends. These are kind of the second big topics, which will be between um, sometimes 5 marks, and then it could go from 10, 15, 20 marks if it's a big question. But remember, WACC and capital budgeting, those are generally the big questions with mergers and acquisitions. And then strategy and risk management is a little bit on a smaller topic. I don't think it will exceed 15 marks, probably 10, 5 marks, but it's not a big topic. The reason being they tested is as follows. The reason why they have it in the syllabus is because it's an important topic from a SAICA point of view. SAICA sees strategy, risk management, and governance very, very important. However, even SAICA don't test it in depth, because SAICA acknowledges that it is a topic that is of a more specialized nature, and it's a topic that you become accustomed to as you grow your experience and your career over time. So now we're going to go into strategy and risk management and what we need to know, and what SAICA expect of us to know. Remember, this is MAC 3702. Not all of you may be going onto the CA route, but this course is a requirement for those that want to do CTA, and therefore the way they set up the course is to ensure that those who do go on to CTA have the appropriate knowledge and skills. So strategy, risk, and risk management. I'm first going to deal with strategy, and then I'm going to deal with risk management. For strategy, there are certain tools that they will test us on. They will test us on PESTEL, they will test us on Porter's 5 forces, and they'll test us on SWOT analysis. Now, to think about this, the only aspect that we need to know is the strategic analysis point of view, how to analyze strategy. What's going to happen that a strategy will be given to you. They're not going to ask you to come up with a strategy. A strategy will be given to you, and then they're going to ask you, dear student, please analyze the strategy. Now you can analyze a strategy using 3 tools. Number 1, there's many tools, but for our purposes, 3 tools, actually 4, but we'll just cover the first 3. So number 1, PESTEL. Number 2, Porter's 5 forces. Number 3, SWOT analysis. However, you can't use any one anytime. Each one has its applicable place. So when you do strategic analysis, you must break it up into 2 parts. Strategic analysis is broken up into external analysis and internal analysis. External analysis is further broken down into 2 parts. It is broken down into the external macro environment and in the external micro environment. The external macro environment refers to the country or countries that a company operates in. So nationally, internationally. If you look at Woolworths, Woolworths operate multinationally. They operate in South Africa and they operate in Australia. So when they do an external analysis from a macro environment, they will analyze South Africa and they will also analyze Australia. When you are analyzing the external macro environment, when you're analyzing a country, then you use PESTEL, which is P for political, E for economical, S for social, T for technological, another E for environmental, and L for legal and regulation. You can look on the platform, there's details over there. Okay, so that is PESTEL. When do you use PESTEL? When you analyze the external macro environment, when you analyze the country in which a company operates in. Why this is important? If you use the wrong tool for the wrong analysis, you're going to get everything wrong. So, for example, if you use SWOT, if you use Porters for the external macro environment, you're not going to get any marks. Okay, you could take it even further. If you correctly use PESTEL for the macro environment, that's correct. However, if you put a legal thing under economics, you're going to lose the marks. So they want to also see that you know which factor affects which column. Okay, so just be aware of that. So make sure you know that. Now let's go to the second part of the external analysis, and that is the external micro environment. The external micro environment relates to the industry or industries in which a company operates. So, for example, Woolworths operates in two industries. They operate in one big industry, but they operate in two industries. So number one, they operate in food and they operate in clothing. Although it's both retail, they operate in food and they operate in retail. That's kind of two different industries. And then there's another industry they operate in the financial services industry. How come? Because they provide credit. Okay, they have their own credit card, their own store card. So they operate basically in three industries: two broad, financial services and retail, but under retail, they operate in food and clothing, which is two separate. Okay, I mean, you can already see why it's two separate. When the pandemic happened, what stayed, what closed? Like Woolworths operated their food, but they had to close their clothing. So as you can see, it is two very different industries. Okay, even though it falls under the broader retail. So what tool do you use to analyze the industry? We use Porter's five forces to analyze the industry in which a company operates. So that is why when you read a scenario and you read a required, you must be very careful as to what they're asking you. They're not necessarily going to say the country. You will have to have a look how they word the question to see um, which um, which tool you need to use based on the question that they ask. So, like we said, you have the external environment, the internal environment. The external environment is broken up into two: external macro and external micro. External macro, you use PESTEL, that relates to the country. External micro, you use Porters, because that relates to the industry in which the company operates. Now we move on to internal. Internal analysis refers to the company's resources and capabilities. So resources like their buildings, their machinery, their equipment. Capabilities refers to their skill set. Do they have the right people? Do they have the right skills? Okay. So when you analyze a company, so the first was analyzing the country in which the company operates, you use PESTEL. The other one was to analyze the industry in which the company operates, you use Porters. And then when you analyze the company itself, you look to its resources and its capabilities. What resources does it have? What buildings, what equipment, what IT, and all of those type of stuff does it have? And then at its capabilities, that is its skills, the type of people that they have. So that will inform you, okay? And this is where SWOT analysis comes in. You use those three things to complete the SWOT analysis. The SWOT analysis is completed using PESTEL, using Porters, using resource and capabilities. So the SWOT analysis helps you come up with a strategy. Okay, so SWOT analysis stands for S weakness. S strengths, W weakness. What is the other one now? O opportunity, and T threats. Now, what's important to note? The S and W relates to internal factors. O and T relates to external factors. So when you are looking for opportunities and threats, you must look to PESTEL and you must look to Porters. When you're looking at internal factors, strengths and weaknesses, you look to the resources and you look to the capabilities of an entity. Once again, even if you get the right stuff in SWOT, but you put it in the wrong column, you're going to get it wrong. So if you put a strength, if you put an internal thing under an internal strength under opportunities, you're not going to get the marks because an internal relates to strengths and weaknesses, where an external factor relates to opportunities and threats. So to complete the SWOT analysis, opportunities and threats are external factors. So you use external tools, which is PESTEL and Porters. The S and W refers to internal factors. So you use internal tools, which refers to resources and capabilities. There's more other tools available, but those are the typical ones that we need to be aware of. So that's very, very important to take note. So you complete a SWOT analysis based on those items. Okay, so that's all I wanted to cover over here. That's all I wanted to cover from a strategy point of view. Before I go on to risk management, do you have any questions for me? Anyone have questions? No. Okay. So now we go on to before we go on to risk management, I want to just share something quick with you regarding Jeff Bezos. Um, if you read carefully how a textbook tells you how to come up with a strategy, a textbook says, complete a SWOT analysis and use a SWOT analysis to help you come up with a strategy. Okay, so if you read carefully, it will tell you use a SWOT analysis to help you come up with a strategy. Now, to complete a SWOT analysis, you will use PESTEL, Porters, internal strengths, and you will use internal resource and capabilities. So that's how you come up. So you come up with a strategy based on what you have as resources and what you have as skills. Okay. Now, this is very different to the way Jeff Bezos comes up with a strategy. I was reading an article. The article came out recently because Jeff Bezos is stepping down as a CEO after, I think, like close to 30 years. So is it 30 years? Whatever. I don't know how long it is, but anyway, or 20 years. So he is stepping down as CEO from Amazon. So obviously, a lot of was a big thing, and so some people interviewed some of his in South Africa we say directors. So in America they call them vice presidents. So Jeff Bezos is perhaps the president, which is the CEO. Then all the other directors below him would be the vice presidents. Okay. So there was two guys that worked under Jeff Bezos that are were vice presidents, and they wrote a new book called Invent and Wonder. So this one place interviewed them regarding the book, and they shared how Jeff Bezos comes up with certain things. So it all stems down to Jeff Bezos's core values. So they have many principles, but his core values are basically three or four, but the three I can remember. Number one, we probably all know this one. He has a customer obsession. Number two, he has a long-term thinking. Number three, he has an innovation. He has a craze for innovation. That is the three major core values of Amazon. Always think long-term, always think innovatively, and you must be obsessed with the customer. So these guys was explaining what does it mean to to be obsessed with the customer. In one meeting they had, Jeff Bezos called the one VP aside, and he told him, "Listen here, that the world is going digital. However, more than 75% of Amazon's revenue is coming from physical products. They need to change it. They need to come up with something that will change that narrative, because they can't sell 75% of the 75% of the revenue can't come from physical products, because then they will die out." And through that came the Kindle. So that's how the Kindle was born, right? Jeff Bezos never came up with it. Those guys came up with it, but it was. So he explains how the process that they went through. Jeff Bezos demanded that they have a look what customers need, what customers want. Remember, Jeff Bezos doesn't believe in customers come first. And I mean, he doesn't believe in customers is always right. He don't listen to customers. He have a look, and in his mind he thinks, what do he think customers need in 3 years' time? That's the long-term thinking part. In 3 years' time, what is customers going to need? And he builds it and he tests it out. You don't go find out what customers want. So they had to come up with something, and they had to come up with what customers would need, and that's how they came up with the Kindle. And only then, once they came up with a Kindle, and they were all happy that yes, the Kindle is what we want, that is what's going to add compelling value to customers, then they asked the question, okay, now we know we want this, but this is how we're going to um, delight our customers. What resources and capabilities do we have? Very, very different. Um, the traditional way says, what resources and capabilities do we have? Okay, now what can we build? Jeff Bezos is saying, what do we need to build to delight our customers? And then the question is, okay, what resource and capabilities do we have? If we have it, great stuff. If we don't have it, go get it. So you see the difference. And that is why companies that think of, they first check out what resources and capabilities they have, and then from there decide what they build. They're hardly ever innovative, because they just stuck to what they currently have. Companies that are innovative think like Jeff Bezos. Now remember, Jeff Bezos didn't come up with this. There's lots of books that talks about this. There was many, many companies that built great things like Jeff Bezos before Jeff Bezos. He just said Jeff Bezos is the most current example. So just I want you to think about that. There's a huge difference between analyzing your resources and your capabilities and then deciding what you want to build, as opposed to understanding what you want to build based on what you think what you think would delight customers, and then finding the necessary resource and skills to build that thing. So that was a real world example just to show you, which is quite different to the traditional way of doing strategy and risk management. Anyway, that was just besides the point. Let's move on to risk management and governance. Um, the governance aspect, I'm not going to cover, because governance is basically tested extensively in auditing. So I'll give you a high level view of what you need to know from a governance point of view, but they won't go hectic in it as well from a MAC 3702 point of view, because it's really tested thoroughly in auditing. I'll just give you the high level stuff from a MAC point of view, what you need to know from a governance. But let's get into risk management. Risk management is an important process. Like many would say that companies that have a good risk management process, a good risk management process would generally be a great company. Sorry, because they are always identifying risks before the time and coming up with, with risk responses before the risk actually takes place. And that is why those companies become great, because they survive. They survive those stuff. In fact, they actually prevent them in most cases. But anyway, risk management. With every strategy, there's a risk. Okay, so with every strategy, there will be a risk. And hence, you need to address that risk. So when it comes to risk management, we follow a four-step process. Some place will break it up further, but basically we will follow a four-step process. Step number one, identify the risk. Step number two, um, identify the risk. Step number two, let me just think now. Um, it's on my mind. I'll just, okay, so I'll come to that step number two now. Step number three, it is to address the risk. And step number four, it is to monitor the risk. Step number two is to measure the risk. Okay, so number one, identify the risk. Number two, prioritize, measure the risk. Number three, address the risk. And number four, monitor the controls. So when you identify the risk, for example, life healthcare, a risk to life healthcare is they will number one, they identify the risk and they will say one of their risks is, or let's use clicks, because we all understand clicks. So clicks number one or number two risk is lack or shortage of pharmacists. Okay, so they identified the risk. With identifying the risk, you will provide a description and you will provide some context. So, for example, you identify the risk, there's a shortage of pharmacists. Then you just describe it a little bit by saying, due to not enough people studying pharmacy, there's a shortage of skilled pharmacists. Then you provide context. Context would be Clicks is a pharmacy company, a pharmacy retail company, and hence they require skilled pharmacists. With a shortage, they would it would hamper their strategy to actually be one of the best retail pharmacies. Okay, so step number one, identify the risk. By identifying the risk, you're giving it a title, you're providing some description and then you provide some context relative to your business. Step number two is to measure the risk. Measuring the risk there's basically like three things or four things you will do. Number one, you will prioritize the risk. You will say whether it's a high, low, or medium risk. Most companies don't say high, low, or medium. They prioritize in their financial statements by saying one, two, three. So risk number one is the highest risk. Risk number two is the second. Risk number three, third highest, and so forth. So Clicks also prioritize their risk in their financial statements by saying one, two, three, four, five. Life Healthcare do the same thing. They number it one, two, three. I think they list about 13 risks. Okay, so step two, you measure it is by prioritizing it. So prioritizing mean high, low, medium, or one, two, three, whatever you give it, right? From highest to lowest. Then you need to also state the impact that it would have on the business if it were to occur. So if this risk would occur, what would the impact be on the business? High, low, medium, significant, not significant, whatever you want to call it. The third aspect is to provide the likelihood that it would occur. So once again, high, low, medium. So for example, the impact of a particular risk could be high. However, the likelihood of it occurring is low. Okay, so that is why you need to state those stuff. So we went to step one, step two. Step one, identify the risk, giving it a title, and then giving a description, and then contextualizing it. Step number two, like measuring the risk. There's maybe other term, but let's say measuring the risk. You set its priority. You state the impact that it would have on the company were it to occur. And then number three, you state the likelihood that it would occur. That is step one and step two. Now we come into step three, that you address the risk. That is, you put in controls. Now, there's four ways to address a risk. In no particular order. Number one, it is to avoid the risk. Number two, it is to ignore the risk. Number three, it is to transfer the risk. Number four, it is to mitigate the risk. Now, to ignore the risk means you are saying you know there's a risk, you're happy to live with it. Okay? So if it occurs, you're happy with it. If it don't occur, you're happy with it. You don't care about it. You are ignoring it. Now remember, you can't ignore every risk. You will ignore a risk that basically has a low impact or has a low likelihood. Okay, so if it were to occur, we don't care. If it and the chance of it occurring is also low. Sometimes you ignore a risk even though it is big. So, for example, in the gold industry, the gold price is a significant risk to the business. Because remember, the gold price revenue for a gold company is calculated as the kilograms of gold, what let's say kilograms, whatever measurement they use, multiplied by the quality, multiplied by the exchange rate, multiplied by the gold rate. So that gold rate is very significant and it has a significant impact on the revenue line item. However, gold companies ignore that risk, even though it's significant. And the reason being is they're ignoring it strategically. The reason being is before they used to control the risk by putting in gold hedges, but investors were saying, dear gold companies, please do not hedge against the gold price, because we are investing in you as a gold company to be exposed to that risk. By you hedging, we are no longer exposed to that risk, and we're no longer exposed to the gold price, and that basically goes against the whole objective of investing in you. So although in that case there's a significant impact, the company chooses to ignore it from a strategic point of view. Okay, so that is ignoring it. But in any other case, you ignore a risk that has a low impact and that has a low likelihood of occurring. So just be aware of that. Okay. The second one is to avoid a risk. Now remember, you can't avoid every risk. If you avoid every risk, that means you don't have a business, you can't be in business. So that is why avoiding a risk is not applicable all the time. You will avoid a risk where it is not your core business, okay? Traditionally, okay? You will avoid a risk where it's not your core business. If it's not your core offering and it's too high risk, you rather just stay away, okay? So basically from that perspective. Can you think of an example? What would be I can't think of an example, but basically, so if you are going to something that is non-core and it's too risky for you, you're not too knowledgeable about it and so forth, and you don't really want to go there, then you just you avoid it. Okay, but you can't avoid every risk. So for example, a gold company can't say, okay, um, we don't want to be exposed to the exchange rate. They can't say that we don't want to be exposed to kilograms and all of that. They need, that's how, without those factors, without those risks, they can't operate the business. Okay, so they can't avoid it completely. So you can't avoid every risk. Just be aware of that. The third is to transfer a risk. Transferring a risk means you will take out insurance. But like if I think about insurance, that's not really transferring the risk, but insurance puts you through so much questioning to a point that because they don't want to pay you. So I don't know if it's really transferring, but in the technical sense, you are transferring a risk when you take out insurance. In the real world, you know how insurance are. You are more risk. There's more risk with them than without them. So that is how you transfer risk. The fourth one, which is which is the common one, and is what you will deal, and this is how you deal with most risks, and that is to mitigate the risk. Okay, that is to control the risk. That is to reduce the risk to an acceptable level. So mitigate, reduce, control the risk, the same thing. That is what you will do. That's how you will deal with most risks in a company. You will reduce the risk to an acceptable level. There are different ways to reduce a risk to an acceptable level. From a financial management point of view, the typical ways would be to take out forward contracts, to take out swaps, to take out options, to take out forward exchange contracts, to take out futures, to take out options, to take out swaps, interest rate swap, and so forth. So from a financial point of view, from a financial management point of view, you will manage and reduce risks through hedging, through taking out derivative instruments. Okay. But there's not just only those type of risks. For example, look at for clicks, the risk of the shortage of skilled pharmacies. You can't take out a forward exchange contract to mitigate against pharmacists. Okay, lack of skilled pharmacists. You can't take out a futures contract. So how then do you mitigate, reduce, address that risk? So what they would do, they would have programs. They would have programs to upskill pharmacists. They will have bursaries in place. They would have so now they helping skill pharmacists. The next thing is the current pharmacists that they have. How do they keep them? And that is they will talk about sending on continuous training, having great retention packages, and all of those type. They'll put policies in place to actually address those risks. So in most cases, you will address a risk through policies and procedures. Just remember, policies and procedures is a good thing. However, the policies and procedures must not be to such an extent that it hinders the company from being agile, from the company growing, from the company innovating fast. Okay, so remember, you like if you think about how if you think about a procedure that goes through government, you know that is not a great procedure based on the stereotypes that comes with government procedures. So government have lots of procedures in place, but is it really hindering the process? Yes or no? So you need policies and procedures that don't hinder the process, but rather support the process and help you to achieve your objectives. So keep that in mind. Okay, so you want policies and procedures is a good thing, but it must support the process and not hinder the process. And that is where governance comes in. Governance is basically the policies and procedures that you put in place to manage your risks. Okay, so for example, for Clicks, they would have perhaps a great onboarding series for pharmacists. They would have a training and skills development policy and procedure for pharmacists. They would have some great employment process or package or something for for um, for pharmacists. So that is how you reduce risks to an acceptable level. Okay, so just be aware of that. Remember, the ultimate responsibility of risk management lies with the board of directors. The board of directors would then delegate it to different people. Obviously, these various delegated people or bodies or teams would be accountable, but ultimately the the board of directors are responsible for managing risk, for managing risk of a company. Okay, so just be aware of that. Um, like I said, um, how you address risks is either you ignore, avoid, transfer, but the most common one is to mitigate. Mitigate means to control the risk or to reduce the risk. How do you reduce risk? It's the board's responsibility to manage risks. They will manage it in one of those four ways. The common way is through mitigating them. And how do you mitigate them? Through policies and procedures. But these policies and procedures must not hinder the process. They should support the process. And then comes step 4, which is to monitor or review the controls that you have put in place. Just to monitor and to review how you are addressing these risks. And that is where the risk manager comes in place. They would have to that is where the risk manager comes in, where they would continuously monitor how they are doing and implement any rectifying procedures. But you're not going to get 100%. It's a continuous process, but you want to make sure there is something in place, and how can you prevent them going forward, and how can you improve them. If you set your risk management process once, you're going to fail. It's a continuous process, and that is why you have a risk and compliance team. Okay. Just trying to think if there was anything else I wanted to share. That's basically it that I wanted to share. Do you guys have any questions? Akila, you have any questions?
No, not at this point.
Kayla said no. Donald said no. Do I say Esther? Is that how I pronounce your name? Kelsey said no. Fahim? Fahim, Esther, Abby's all good. Fahim is all good. Bungani? Paul, anything from your side? Okay, if that's it, then we will call it okay, identification of risks. So Bungani, how do you identify risks? So it will be the responsibility of the company. So basically, it is the responsibility of the board to identify risks. The board will basically delegate it to the various teams, and they'll have to come up with the risks. When you identify a risk, so for example, with Clicks, I think they're number one. If it's not number one, then it's number two. Their top risk is the shortage of shortage of skilled pharmacists. Okay, so they identify that as a risk. Then you need to describe the risk. By just saying shortage of pharmacists is not enough to describe. That's like just basically a title or a heading. Now you will describe the risk. You'll say that in South Africa, there's a lack of skilled pharmacists. That's kind of describing the risk. Now, the third aspect from identification is to contextualize it. How is this applicable to Clicks? So Clicks will contextualize it by saying Clicks is one of the leading pharmacy companies in South Africa. And as a result, skilled pharmacists is a high priority to our company. So now they contextualize it. I mean, whatever they will say, but something like that. So that is identification. You need to identify what is important to your company. So remember, a high risk means it will hamper the company from achieving its strategic objectives. It will hamper the company from doing the business it wants to do. Okay, so that is basically how you will categorize. So, for example, at Life Healthcare, the number one risk, Life Healthcare. So, like these private hospitals. Life Healthcare is one of the leading private hospitals in South Africa. The number one risk is funders. So who are the funders? I can't remember the word, what they call it, but it's basically who are the funders? Medical aids. So if you think about a private hospital, who goes to private hospitals? People with medical aid. And it's only people that have a good medical aid or have a medical aid that will go pay for private hospital costs. No one want to cover that out of their pocket. So most of the money would come if the medical aid approves it. So they get a lot of pressure from medical aids to reduce to not charge high prices. So that is a huge risk to them, because if medical aids is not happy to pay their rates, that means less people will take up their services, because people don't want to pay out of their pocket. They want the medical aid to pay everything. So that is basically a high risk. So they will then explain how they deal with those type of risks. Similarly, a second high risk for Life Healthcare is a shortage of skilled labor. Now remember, a hospital by law is not allowed to employ doctors. Okay, so they can't employ a doctor. That is why hospitals will have various practices. If you go to a private hospital, you will have those consultation rooms, because hospitals they will have agreements with doctors to be there at their hospital to offer the various services, because hospitals know patients will go where there are top doctors. Hospitals are not allowed to employ doctors, so they would establish good relationships with doctors to ensure doctors stay in a contract with them. So that is also a high risk to them. So number one, one of the risks is that there's not enough skilled doctors. So and then the second one, the skilled doctors that they do have, how do they retain them? So that is basically a huge risk. I think it's in the top 5, if not number 2. And then obviously regulation and the pandemic and all of those type of stuff. But anyway, that's all from my side. Do you have any other questions? Okay, so there's no other questions. So that's all. Remember, from next week, we're doing, I think it's WAC, either WAC or capital budgeting. Can't remember which one comes first. And we will do an actual question. So the first 30 minutes, we go through a high-level overview and understanding of the topic, and then we will cover a question. Here, there was no point in spending 90 minutes or 60 minutes on a question, because there's not a real question. So I'd rather spend a high-level overview of financial management, and then I went into a high-level overview of risk strategy and risk management. In the same way I went over the high-level overview of strategy and risk management, I will do that in every other class for that particular topic, and then also cover a question. We will definitely cover a question for the big topics. For the smaller topics, we will cover a question, but we may also provide some recaps on other topics. Okay, but that's all from my side. If there's no other questions, then we are good for tonight. Okay, thank you guys. I hope you found the class beneficial and I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Right, thanks.
Thank you.